Record. Good morning, dearest friends, honored members of the Talmud Chabura. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line, letters at a time. Today is Wednesday, the 30th, March 30th. So it might be, would we call this, do we call this, well, no, tomorrow will be Rosh Chodesh. And it is the 26th of Adar Sheni. No, not Rosh Chodesh. I mean Rosh Chodesh April. The 26th.
I was just thinking.
Hold on. One second. I'm just getting the date so that when someone watches.
Yeah, it's about the date. You
March 30th.
You should say the year as well because you're recording it.
Okay, that's fair. We are in Tafshin Pei Beis 5782, the 26th of Adar Sheni. We're studying the entire Talmud presently. Maseches Shabbas Perek Arba Asar. We're in the tail end or towards the end. Although these are short chapters, so the beginning to the end is not so much. But we are on Kuf Yud Amud Beis 101b. I think yesterday I said we get to 10. Not 101. I'm sorry, 110b. I said we get to 111, but we'll get there today with Hashem's help. And we're still in the topic of medical interventions, of course, launched in the context of the permissibility to consume certain foods or drinks or not on Shabbos. And we are analyzing yet the segment of the Mishnah that says that you could drink all drinks, which are commonly consumed with the exception of kos ikarim, which is a beverage that when taken in its undiluted form could cause a person to become sterile. And it also has other remedies. If you mix in wine, it could be good for someone that has an unhealthy infection causing a discharge. And we then went through a series of alternate remedies. Some of them entailed screaming, scaring, cooking, burning, jumping, a lot of different solutions to help treat this illness. And we're actually at the tail end. We haven't even finished. We have a few more. No, I'm sorry. We finished that. Now we're talking about jaundice. And so we said that for jaundice, there are also different interesting remedies. You might want to smear brine of a pickled locust or a fish or a bird, and then trigger or experience a great degree of perspiration, perhaps by going into a schwitz or standing next to the oven or wrapping yourself in a very warm blanket, possibly of someone that has a similar infection or illness as you. And indeed, at least once actually is recorded as having worked. But what if that remedy doesn't work? And that's where today's Talmud is going to pick up. And again, in pretty short order, we're going to transition on to the topic of the permissibility of causing a person to become sterile. And is it permissible? Is there a biblical prohibition? What is it? And are we avoiding it in this instance? And so let's jump right in. We're jumping right in. Welcome, dear professor. Good to have you on. And again, we're talking about the remedies of Yarokna, of jaundice. So we read in the Mishnah, not in the Mishnah, the Gemara cited previously that you mix two of the ingredients, which I don't even recall what the ingredients were. It's been a while, but you mix two of the ingredients that were enumerated, which were listed in. Oh no, we did this already. I'm sorry. Here's where we're at. The Eloi, if this wrapping in the blanket or eating or smearing those different substances don't help a person beat and overcome their jaundice, Lysi Talasa Kefizi Tamri Parsiyasa. Bring 3 vessels of Persian dates, Utlasa Kefizi Dekira Dinishtarufi, and 3 vessels of wax, and aloe, red aloe, boil it together and take it. The Eloi, if that doesn't work, I think we had this remedy before. Lysi Ila Bar Chamara. Bring a donkey's fowl, a baby donkey. And this is, I think this is where we ended off, right? We said ER. I think that's where we Vili Galach, Mitziyasa de Resha. I'm sorry.
It would be interesting to see why Persian dates and Persian onions, maybe they had a reputation for being of high quality.
Or something, or at least of high medicinal value. But now we're past the Persian stuff. It also might be that the Talmud was composed in Iraq and in part of the Persian Empire, and maybe those were the stuff they had. I don't know.
But that's what they wouldn't say. They would say take local.
I hear you. What? Anyways, take a baby donkey, and shave the middle of its head. And get a little blood. Let a little blood from its forehead. And place it on the head of the person who is struggling with jaundice. But don't let it get into your eyes because that could cause visual impairment. Why would this blood blind him? So Rashi tells us it's not about this blood. It's about any blood. Don't allow the blood into your eyes. That is another solution. The Eli, but what if, against all odds, this doesn't seem to work? Hold on, first of all, getting Mark on. Oh, welcome, Mark. The Eli, if the blood of a shaved baby donkey's head doesn't provide the necessary cure, Laisi Reisha, the Barcha, the Manach, the Chishba. Well, then bring a ram's head that's been kavush, that's been a pickle. Bring a pickled ram's head.
The pharmacy must have been a very interesting store.
No, they did all of this stuff far away from the consumer's vision, and then they would just serve them these little bottles of stuff, and they didn't know that. By the way, from Rashi, it sounds like, I'm not sure if this is very interesting, but it sounds like the person should also be shaved, and the blood would be poured on his shaved head from a shaved donkey's head. But now we're up to a ram's head that's pickled, shikra, and it should be boiled, cooked in beer, and then you're going to drink that drink. Rashi, no. The Eloi, if that doesn't help, Lacy davar achar chutrana. Bring a davar achar. Anyone know what a davar achar is?
Something else.
What?
Something else.
Right, but you know what? When the Talmud uses the word davar achar, do you know what it means?
Something without a hechsher.
Davar achar. That is correct. Davar achar is usually a euphemism for a chazir, a pig.
Really?
The word the chazir is so impure that we don't even want to use the word chazir. So many times it's called a davar achar. So laisi davar achar chutrana. Bring a davar achar. Rashi chazir talu bechav ravurot minumar. It should be a pig that has spots. Remember, we had this word similar to a leopard. Remember, we had a verse that talked about the chav ravurot, that the spots are like wounds that aren't curable. So we're talking about a pig with speckles or spots on it. We're not done yet. Vilikare. The animal is torn open. Vilosve alibe, and you're going to place this split speckled pig on the heart of the patient. The Eloi, and if that is ineffective, Laisi karase michav tevasa demeshre. Then you should have leaks that come from the middle row. Mi emsa aruga shehem charifim. Bring very, very sharp leaks. Reb Beryl, I hear your question loud and clear. Maybe we should start with the sharp leaks before bringing a davar acher that was probably imported from far away and probably not that popular to have around. I hear you.
What's interesting is even in modern Hebrew, we say basar lavan. We avoid the word.
But I think that's for a different reason. But that's interesting, right? Why do they call it basar lavan? Because hoping the population will be less enraged. That's probably what it is.
Well, I think I've heard an advertisement referred to as the other white meat in America. So, I guess that's where they got it from.
All right, so we have these very strong leaks that are recorded as being effective. The Gemara actually has a story that's recorded about the effectiveness of these leaks. Hahu taya lechoshbei, there was once a taya. As Rabbi Steinzal says, taya is usually the word for in Arab. I think it literally means a business person, but it usually means an Arab peddler. Amar leili ginoi. So he asks his gardener, or he went to the gardener and said, Shkol glimai v'havli meishara dekarti. Please take my cloak, and in exchange, allow me, or borrow. I'll give you. Take Shkol. Take my cloak. V'havli meishara dekarti, and give me the middle row of the leaves. Yehavlei v'achlei, he gave it to him and he ate it. Amar lei, Oshlan glimayich ve'egne bekali. If you don't mind, allow me to borrow your cloak, and I'll catch a dremel. Ikrach gonabe. He wrapped himself and slept in it. Kadi chamam v'kam. As he warmed up, nafal porta mine, it slowly dropped off of him. Rashi v'ignebe v'ishambe. I'll sleep in it. Kali ma'at ichrach gana nichra v'ishambe. Nafal porta. Kodcha talis michoim sreifas acheli sheyatza imazeya v'nafla chatichais dakais. The garment started to fall not just off of him, but Rashi says it started to break apart. What? Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me read this one more time. You had a Arab tradesperson, peddler, who had jaundice. He asked the gardener to give him a garment. To take his cloak, and then in exchange, he'll give him this very important medicinal middle leek. He took the stuff and ate it, and then he said, "Let me have your cloak so I can sleep in it." So the gardener gave it to him, and his coat fell apart. What does that mean? Oh, the Arab. Well, okay, Rabbi Steinsaltz, the Arab tricked the gardener who ultimately received nothing because the cloak fell apart. I'm not sure if everyone agrees that it was a trick. I just think it's describing how he had this fever. And I suppose that means that it was an effective treatment, because you want that fever to help the person be healed of this illness, at least according to the Talmudic era medicine. All right. The Gemara continues now to discuss now the permissibility of being misares, of causing a person to become impotent or sterile. The Mishnah, the Gemara says in one of the recipes, one of the medicines that we talked about, and again, we're now going to pivot back to a halachic, in explicitly halachic conversation, whereas until now we've been doing a lot of exploring ancient medicine. So the Talmud, the Gemara quotes itself, where we said that liyarokna, a person that has jaundice, train b'shichra, you should take 2 of those ingredients, mix it with beer, umi akar, and the person will become impotent, but also ostensibly cured. Umi shari. The Gemara asks, since when is a Jew permitted to lishtais kais ikarim? Since when are you allowed to drink a drink which is going to cause sterility, to become impotent? Tanya, there's a brisa that teaches. How do we know that a human, a person, is not allowed to be to be castrated or to become sterile? Talmud loybar, uve'artzachem loy tasu, b'chem loy tasu. Rashi. Oh, b'chem loy te asu. Rashi. Loy te asu. Koribe loy te asu. Do not cause yourself to become sterile. Divi Rabbi Chanina. These are the words of Rabbi Chanina. So what do we see here? A brisa that explicitly says that a Jewish person is prohibited from causing themselves to become sterile. What pasuk are we reading here? So here is the pasuk. It's talking about carbonis and how an animal needs to be whole. And there are all different reasons why an animal is not allowed to be donated to the Beis Hamikdash as a carbon. It's blind, injured, etc., etc. It can't go on the mizbeach. If it has other illnesses or handicaps, also, it cannot be accepted as a carbon. And then it says, you cannot bring an animal that has its bruised, crushed, or torn testes. Lo yisakrivu laHashem. Uve'artzachem lo yisasu. And in your land, you shouldn't do this. So the pasuk is actually talking about animals, and that a person is not allowed to be misaris. You're not allowed to castrate an animal in Israel and in general. So davar zealous Rashi on the pasuk says, it's teaching us that a Jew is not allowed to castrate any animal, even an unkosher animal.
Rabbi,
hold on. Let me just finish this. Rashi it says ba'artzachem to teach us all critters. It is not exclusively an Israeli restriction. Because whenever there is a restriction to a body, it doesn't make a difference if it's in Israel or in the diaspora. This is the pasuk. Although the pasuk here is talking about animals, Rabbi Chanina reads this, do not do it even to yourself. And therefore, not only are animals not allowed to be made impotent, sterile, but you're even not allowed to do it to a human being.
Rabbi, so people that have pets today who have them fixed should be aware of this, no?
So this is an interesting shaila. It is discussed. I'm not an expert at was it neutering and
spade.
So there's a difference between getting an animal that's already been neutered or spayed and you doing it. The poskim discuss, can you give it to a Gentile to do? It's not, let's hold off on the halachic, the piskei halach on this matter, but yeah, a Jewish halachically observant person should make sure to do the research before giving their animal all of the necessary upkeep, etc.
Rabbi,
I'm sorry?
This paragraph refers to the Kohen Gadol, isn't it?
No, not at all. We are talking here about any Jew in Israel and their animals.
But
Oh no, I hear what you're saying. We're talking about any Jew donating an animal to the base of Mikdash. Although the
I know.
Kohanim are the ones who ultimately are administering or overseeing the offerings, this is a verse that is a prohibition to any Jew.
but a Kohen can't go into the sanctuary like that.
That's
Or
another
into the-
pasuk. That's not this pasuk.
No, but it's very close.
Well, in a sense, yes, because an animal that is wounded or malformed or injured cannot be brought as a carbon, and a human that was malformed or injured or handicapped had certain restrictions in their service in the base of English. That is correct. Yes,
Rabbi,
doctor.
are there any medical or religious or economic conditions under which a man or woman can sort of transgress this in terms of not wanting to be able to bear or have children or
So
father?
it is a complex sugya. Obviously, there are questions that will help inform your question. So are we talking about something that is permanent or temporary? This is not a discussion about birth control per se. That is another discussion.
Right.
Here we're talking probably we're talking about a person tying the tubes or
Right.
or what's the word, of vasectomy. That might be informed by this discussion. I'm not giving up psak halacha, and we're not here to cast judgment on anybody. But it does have bearings on that. There may be certain exceptions, as we said, human life takes precedent over all. So if that's
Rabbi,
When we get to that, excuse me, let me just, Bernie, hold on for a second. When we get to that discussion, I'll put it on the list. We could also throw in the concept of Jewish genetic diseases and how that
Yes.
influences this.
yes, that's actually a very
Okay.
good
Yes.
point. Thank you for bringing it up.
I think also the key question is it reversible?
Well, he said that before in
Yeah,
terms of
possibly. I didn't even want to give up psak, but I said that some of the nuances involved in the answer will have to do in part with that. But doctor, you make a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And today, of course, there's a lot of awareness about not Ashkenazic, in general about genetics, and certainly about the common Ashkenazic genetic illnesses. And ironically, this is one area where people that are involved in the shidduch system have a little bit of an easier time. And again, this is also not about judgment, but if people are being set up and you can do the research about potentially carrying genetic diseases, it's easier to figure that out when you don't have an emotional attachment to someone, and much more challenging if the reality is that even the screenings that are prevalent in the Jewish world or in general, they don't cover everything, and so things can always slip through the cracks. And of course, there are new diseases or genetic diseases that are being discovered, and it's certainly an important issue. So thank you for that. And that actually would be an instance where there would be an important question to ask. If God forbid a couple knows that any pregnancy could lead to
Right.
So that's something that definitely that to be concerned and or to be considered, I should say. All right.
Also the consideration of the danger to the mother.
Yeah, that was the first thing I said, which is of
Yeah.
course you have to consider. But let's see the Gemara, because we'll pick up some data. So the Gemara asks, are you allowed to drink a potion that makes a person sterile? And the Gemara's initial challenge is, how could anyone ever drink such a drink? The Brisa teaches, you Jews should not cause yourselves to become sterile or castrated. Hani mili. So the Gemara says, the initial answer, that's only if the reason for consuming the beverage is for the intention of becoming sterile. Hacha me'atzmoihu. Here, you're not actively. See, I don't know the exact definition of neutering versus spaying, but here it is a chemical process, and it's being done. You're not cutting anything physical. You're drinking a drink, and something happens down the road. Here, you're not doing something. The drink is automatically causing that to happen. Rashi, umisaris mi elav. No, I'm sorry, no. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, how do we know that maybe you're allowed to use chemical, to do chemical sterility or castration? So Rabbi Yochanan taught, if you want your chicken to be castrated, let's say, so you don't have to actually cut or snip anything. Again, part of my biology, and especially about animals, my knowledge is a little lacking. So Alan, I suppose you could probably fill us in if we're interested. You don't probably have to spend a lot of time with animals to have a lot more awareness about. But anyways, Yitol Kar Balasai. All you need to do is remove its comb. So again, just to recap, a person, you're not allowed to actively cut or do a procedure that's going to cause sterility. The Gemara proposes here, you're taking the drink because you're sick. If there's a side effect, you're not seeking out that side effect. So that the Gemara proposes should not be considered this prohibition. And indeed, Rabbi Yochanan teaches in about another animal that what you could do if you wanted to not father any more children or whatever is take its comb, umistaris me'elav, and this animal will no longer be active in the reproductive process. Rashi says, "Va'afal gav the sirus asar b'yadayim." You're not allowed to actively and directly cause sirus, but we find that you're able to do something that triggers a process that leads to what sounds like castration. Gemara says, does that work from Rav Ashi? Rav Ashi, in commenting about a rooster, says something very critical. Ramos rucha hu dinakita le. When a rooster stops being involved in the reproductive process after losing its comb, this is not because it is biologically incapable of being involved in the reproductive process. Ramos ruchahu d'nekitle. You've taken away its stolz. You've taken away its confidence. And when the rooster loses its comb, it's so devastated and loses his confidence, and he therefore abstains from reproduction. Let's read Rashi, V'amar Rashi. The hahulav sirasu. This is not actually that the animals become sterile or castrated. El ramos rucha nakitole litarnago. The animal, a rooster, has a lot of gaiva, and you've taken away its gaiva. Mishanitul haydai hu misabel. He becomes mournful ve'enai mishamish and isn't engaged in reproduction. Rashi says to do something to immediately cause an animal to become sterile, or a person, even if it's you press a button and then something happens, that's prohibited. The only exception is that with a rooster, you're not actually doing anything to its reproductive process. You're simply, that's like putting an animal in a cage and it can't engage in reproduction or something like that. You've caused it not to do it, but you haven't actually touched the reproductive system. Rashi Elabasaris. Elabasaris. The Gemara answers, why does the Mishnah say, why does the Gemara establish that you're allowed to drink kois shel ikarim for healing if it causes a person to become impotent or sterile, which is prohibited? Rashi says, we're talking about a saris. We're talking about a person who already is out of that game. They are already biologically incapable of reproducing for whatever reason. And if that's the case, drinking this drink is not a problem. Rashi, hach deshari lemishti kois shel ikarim. When the Mishnah indicates that you may drink this drink, we're talking b'mishu saris kfar askinan, a person who already is incapable of the reproductive process.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I know less than you do, but wouldn't it now become a
That's
problem
very presumptuous.
for a cattle farmer to have only cows and no bulls, in a sense?
That wouldn't be a problem. You're not obligated to facilitate the animal's reproduction. I mean, for commercial reasons that may be desirable, you have a bunch of animals, you might want them. I mean, listen, today you don't need a bull at all.
Let's say you're raising just bulls and keeping
Right.
them separate. That's the same story as the rooster, in a sense.
I'm actually going to disagree with you and think that I probably know less than you, but I have a feeling that one of some of the reasons for neutering and spaying animals is not only so that they don't actually reproduce, but it also has, I think, a behavioral impact on the animals. And so it's possible that a lot of the reason why these things are done to animals is not exclusively so that they don't father children and they don't get the other animals pregnant, but also it causes more generally, or I should say influences their behavior. Again, I may be wrong about this, but I believe that is the case. Alan, am I correct?
You're correct in one way, yeah. But a farmer who's in the cow business will surely have a bull, or
Yeah.
at least one bull. I mean, what's the purpose of if you don't have the bull, then you've got to use artificial insemination, and
Well,
that costs.
I've been informed that there are those farms who almost entirely depend today on an artificial insemination. Not an artificial. I guess they buy the desirable schayra instead of keeping the whole bull around. And
Why buy it? Why buy it if you can get it free?
But you have a
well, there's a cost to there's a cost to maintaining the bull, and also they may want the genetic diversity in their herd. And so, if you have one bull, if you have a lot of bulls, you have to care for them. If you have one bull, you have some limitations. But if you can go to the Amazon for, and then there's a lot of options. Anyways,
a milk farmer might want a cow just for milking,
right? But yeah. But anyways, the bottom line of this Gemara is that there's a distinction between sirus, actually terminating or either chemically or actually castrating an animal, and just creating conditions that cause it to avoid reproduction. So for example, as Rebero says, there would certainly be nothing wrong with having a farm full of only one gender and thus avoiding the whole reproductive story. Again, that's a commercial decision. And similarly, if there was other things that could be done that would cause the animal to be incapable of engaging in a process, but it wouldn't actually damage its reproductive system, that, according to this Gemara, would also be okay. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. Incidental. So the Gemara wants to say that incidental castration, you drank something because of one thing, and it caused that would be okay. The Gemara says no, because the rooster is a unique situation. Rather, the Gemara is talking about that you could give this remedy only if that person is already sterile or castrated. And for that reason, there are multiple remedies. Tosfos asks an interesting question, which I think has to be noted, even if we're not going to study the whole thing. Tosfos says that a person...
Excuse me, but I just thought of something very important, Alan. We have drugs today that a side effect might be sterility. We can go in this whole halachic area. God.
Yeah. Wow. Again, we don't... This is a no psak zone, but you're right. That is actually an interesting question. If a person is going to the doctor and they prescribe a certain medication and a side effect is sterility, that is something to consider.
But the intent is not the sterilization.
That's what the Gemara is talking about. Here
it's the side effect.
But that's what we're talking about here. This drink is not.
Rabbi, we don't have to worry. Any guy will say, "Forget the pill. I'll deal with the disease."
Not every guy, and it's not a side effect. It's rather secretion, like for example, a prostate surgery that interferes with all those functions.
Right. But again, I want to just be very clear. A person, pikuach nefesh, and a person's wellness and life always takes precedent. And so there are many reasons why a person would be halachically compelled to engage in a medical process that would cause castration or cause them to lose their reproductive capacity. But if there are two medications, one that does and one that doesn't, well, then clearly our Gemara is saying that a person should be mindful even of an indirect, even if it's a side effect and not the what do we call it now because of COVID? We know all these terms: the off-label use versus the intended use. So, anyways,
Rabbi,
yes,
to clear this up, if a doctor prescribes a medication that could cause sterility, you better believe it, and you better be sure that he's going to warn the patient beforehand. And if he doesn't do it, the pharmacist will for sure.
okay, and that's coming from a pharmacist. So we take this yasher koyach. And once again, I want to reiterate my gratitude that we have medical people here and pharmacists and all different kinds of professionals that can keep us.
But Rabbi, what's absolutely amazing, we start with things that we want to laugh at, and we come to have to use some thought from it in modern times. Amazing, amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so the Gemara is now going to continue probing this issue, just a few more lines. But first, I'm sorry, I forgot. First, I want to show you Tosfos. Tosfos brings to our attention that there may be another reason why a person is prohibited from shutting down their reproductive system, even short of a biblical prohibition of castration. Suppose there was no prohibition. Maybe there are opinions in that very brisa that disagree with Rabbi Chanina. Tosfos says, "Im Tomer, a question. Afilu loy asur sirus." Even if there is no prohibition to castrate, tikshilei, the Gemara should still say the late sar mishum pirya v'rivya. There's a negative prohibition that a person is not meant to damage their reproductive system. But there's also a positive mitzvah, which is that people are meant to engage in the reproductive process when that is possible and permissible. So he says maybe the answer is that you have kids. So a person that has kids has already discharged their obligation of pirya v'rivya, of reproduction. There's a mitzvah that we have to repopulate the earth. We cannot just take the gift of life. We have to give the gift of life and fill the world with more people, and as Jews with more Jews, when possible. And indeed, the Gemara, he quotes a Gemara that tells a story about a great sage who needed to or could have taken a medication that would cause the reproductive system to cease to operate, and they already had more than the minimum number of children to fill the baseline obligation. And they quoted there that there's also a mitzvah. There's also a verse that says, we read this actually in the Gemara, I believe. It says, in the morning, sow your seeds, but in the evening, don't withdraw your hand. Meaning that a person should, to the best of their ability, try to continue populating the earth even beyond the bare minimum. But anyways, Tosfos concludes that ultimately this is a fair assessment. But Tosfos brings to our attention that there may be other reasons that a person would be halachically motivated to avoid shutting down their reproductive system. Okay, Tosfos is filling in some information that we already filled in, because we saw the Rashi in the Chumash who says that the prohibition of castrating animals extends to the diaspora. Okay, interesting discussion, but not for now. I will continue the Gemara. Do we not? Well, don't we have a teaching of Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yochanan? The challenge of the Gemara is now is going to say that maybe even a person who already is impotent should also not be allowed to drink kais shalikar. Hakol moedim. Everyone agrees. Certain offerings, actually all offerings.
You have background noise, Rabbi.
I hear it. There's another issue. In the temple, all or almost all the karbonis were matzah. They were not chametz. And you're not allowed to cause your mincha offering to become chametz leavened. Shenemar, as the verse states, Loi seyafeh chametz, lo teaseh chametz. In the context of karbonis, it says, don't make chametz, don't let your offerings become chametz. Rashi, afal pishanech l'kum b'bechor shach zedam, imakizim oy ein makizim nevematum u'mebamum. An animal that has a certain illness that would be alleviated by bloodletting. There's a question, are you allowed to let blood on this animal? Because a firstborn animal is, when it has no blemish, is dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash, and you're not allowed to create an injury on this animal. So the Gemara says, although everybody agree, although there's a machlokes about if you're allowed to cause an injury to an animal that's already injured, so although there are other scenarios where maybe a double prohibition would not be a problem, everybody agrees that you're not allowed to cause an offering to become chametz, even if it already has become chametz once. I believe what we're talking about here is adding leavening agents to the carbon. So maybe someone already added a drop, you're not allowed to add any more. Similarly, the Gemara says, or the Gemara quotes here, in the name of Rabbi Chia Barabba, "B'misaris achar misaris shu chayiv." If you're going to castrate an animal, although it's already castrated, which we have to see what that means, you're chayiv. Shnemar uma'uch v'chasos v'nosok v'chara. So these are 4 different types of ways that an animal's reproductive system might be damaged. And the Torah says, crushed. Well, let's see all the translations here. Bruised, crushed, torn, or cut. Imal karus chayev. A person is not allowed to cause a more nominal damage or severing. On nasik lekol shekain. Surely the next step, which is total detachment, should also be prohibited. And so we see here that if a person's reproductive system, the organs are not a person, I'm sorry, an animal's, and I guess by extension a person too, is damaged or injured there, they are yet not allowed to do additional harm to that system. Therefore, similarly, even if a person is incapable of engaging in the reproductive process, they may yet be prohibited from further damaging that system. Rashi Kairis, they're not entirely severed. They are still there, just maybe detached. So any step of taking it further would be prohibited. And the Gemara therefore answers, we're talking about not just a person that has a compromised reproductive system, but a person who is at the stage where their reproductive system has already come to a halt and has winded down. And under those circumstances, one would be permitted to take that drink. And Tosfos disagrees on the exact definition of cut, severed, detached. Tosfos feels that the initial damage is a little more attached than Rashi indicates. So there's a dispute about the definition of that word, karus v'nasak. Hold on a second. Are you saying that a person might reach a stage in life where their reproductive system is entirely shut down? Well, what if a person has a wondrous medical rejuvenation and they find their systems are once again operational? Rabbi Yochanan once talked about certain medicines that said, "Hein, hein, hechziruni lin uraisi." A certain fountain of a certain medication restored him to his vigor of his youth.
You're making my day, Rabbi. Making my day.
There is always hope, says the Gemara. Rashi, Harefuai Samurai Sham. There was discussion about medicines to assist people in jump starting the reproductive system. And over there it says, the system seems to have winded down and they were restored. Alma Zakin Maila. So from here we see that even a person who thinks that they are far gone, there's always room for is the word hitranenut, a refreshing, a reactivation. And so how can you ever say that a person is at a point where their system has winded down for good? And so the Gemara actually says, Ela B'isha. We have to conclude that this is talking about women who once women reach or are past that stage in life, that is relatively permanent. Rashi she'enim mitzvah perivirivya. And actually he says that once the system winds down, so then Rashi says there's no obligation to try to jumpstart the system. So the Gemara says, yeah, we're talking about a woman whose reproductive system has certainly ground to a halt, or a person that was maybe born without that capacity. So you thought it couldn't get any better after yesterday's Gemara, but I guess the point that or not the point, but a point is the Torah has the Torah discusses every part of human life, and halacha informs all parts of human existence and human living. And so we can have a discussion like this about, which again, ultimately, just to remind everyone how we got here. The Gemara Mishnah talks about a kos ikarim, a drink that could cause a person to become sterile. The question is it ever permissible? The Gemara answers, well, what about a person that's already sterile? No, the initial answer is a person is not taking it with the intention of affecting their reproductive system. But the Gemara says even indirectly could be a problem. And so then the Gemara probes the possibility that we're talking about a person who their system is already not functional. And of course, the Gemara adds wonderfully optimistic news that sometimes something seems like it's down, but it's not out. And there could be a rejuvenation of the systems. And so ultimately the Gemara's conclusion is that we're talking about a person who is either not halachically compelled to engage in reproduction, or that they are absolutely and certainly out of the game. And that concludes
Rabbi.
Mishnah. Hold on, the Mishnah that we just studied. Rabbi Beryl, go ahead.
I'm very disappointed that they don't mention what remedies. They said there are remedies. Where are the details?
We're gonna have to go look at where I know you're joking, but yeah, I don't know the citation either.
Actually, it's Rabbi Steinsaltz that says there are remedies, not the Gemara.
I'm sorry. I didn't look in Rabbi Steinsaltz. I'm sure he gives
No, it just Steinsaltz says that there are remedies, but it's he who doesn't.
Professor, you notice that he put a question mark, Rabbi Steinsaltz, in his comment.
Right.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm just curious in general, but specifically what we're learning. At what age and stage in the Lubavitch yeshiva or in the yeshivas that you're familiar with do the children, quote, learn this or just skip this, or
you're asking
and other things that are related to private issues that usually are not discussed with younger children?
You're asking an interesting question. I can't give you like an authoritative. I'm gonna have to think back. So, for example, I'll tell you this: in third grade, when they teach the kids Mishnah in Maseches Brachos, so there's the discussion of a Bal Keri, which is usually the first opportunity for a kid to be exposed to this kind of world. I don't think in third grade we were explained exactly what that was. So certainly at a very young age, there's not. But at later points, there is, I believe, like a guidance from the Chabad Rebbes not to skip portions of the Talmud and not to skip portions in the Chumash for the teacher's fear of having to address that to the students. So that's not really a perfect answer. Like I don't remember like a Rebbe in yeshiva per se getting up and giving a detailed, but there is certainly an idea of not skipping even the parts of the Gemara that are quote unquote more mature. And the reality is that at a certain point, I'm sure there are yeshivas that do, and I'm sure there are other yeshivas that are probably even more, if the word is explicit. But I think it's an interesting question. I actually would be curious now to go back and chat with some of the educators and see how they deal with these types of Gemaras.
For instance, the story of Yehuda and Tamar.
Right.
How do they approach that?
The reality is that I don't know what happened 50 and 100 in the shtetl. Today, there are no secrets. And the children at a certain age, know everything. Really. And so the point is better that they should have to have an orientation around these matters within an adult, mature, responsible, and halachic way than to have all the information just from the black market, if you will, or so.
Rabbi,
yes,
there's very important issues involved here, because in Montreal, our chief rabbi, Rabbi Weiss, is an expert in dealing with couples who can't have children, with freezing the eggs and all that. So I see now one of the questions would be, at what age would he help a couple?
So that actually is very interesting.
Very interesting stuff going on.
Because today, the wonder of modern scientists is so that even women who they think they're entirely in menopause and they're no longer able to have children, there are, I don't know if necessarily like Sarah at 90, there are today people that are getting pregnant, with the right medical intervention and assistance, even at an advanced stage. And I'm not even talking about in vitro, which is the greatest halachically complex matter, because the Rabbanim halacha insists on having a mashkiach.
What they do is they stay in the hospital with the eggs that they're going to be using and all that. He happens to be, I think, on a world level, an expert, Rabbi Weiss.
Yeah. It's a big matter, and the reality is, the need for oversight is not for nothing, because as much as the system is very professional, there are stories about a couple who they had biological material from both to create the child, and they were both of one ethnicity, and the child that was born ended up of a different ethnicity. And so there's evidence that there was a mix-up somewhere along. I mean, no, actually, there could be other reasons why that happened, but in this instance, it was confirmed that there was a mix-up. So there are mix-ups, and so the halacha says, or the Jewish present practice is to have a actual person that has a halachic ne'emanut to keep their eyes on that at all times.
Another interesting related contemporary issue that we could put on the list and has been focused on more recently is transgender issues, and of course homosexuality in general, and that for a long time has not been avoided in the schools, at least the modern Orthodox day schools that I'm familiar with. They've been whether forced or willingly had to deal with those issues for many years.
Well, today you could try to put your head in the sand as much as you like, but there are children and realities that necessitate, I don't know these are questions that I'm happy to defer to, educators, but these are real world issues and real live issues. and you can only put your head in the sand for so long.
Rabbi, you have it right in the headlines of DeSantis's rule, right?
Well,
Today's
his rule is
headline.
that they shouldn't teach these things to kids up to
Right.
3rd grade, and I that sounds reasonable to me. Personally, I hope that's not, I think in general, parents should be given the first opportunity. Now, not all parents discharge that responsibility, but I think parents should have the first stab at guiding a child's vision of morality. Again, as Jewish people, we're,
No, but the danger was shown. I don't know. I'm sure it's available. I probably saw it on one of the American channels that one of the teachers is pushing his sexuality and his approach, and he teaches kindergarten.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't mean to cut off this conversation. Obviously, it's important and also
We're not going to solve anything.
But I just wanted to show you one halacha just for our here. This is just the Rambam's summation. There are a few different halachic concerns about a person who is a male, particularly that has experienced what the halacha is calling in a very clinical way castration. Obviously, there are injuries that can and do occur to a certain percentage of the population. But here is the words of the Rambam that I want to share with you. Asur lahafsid evrei zera. Person is not allowed to damage the organs of the reproductive system. Humans, animals, wild animals, or birds, whether they're kosher or not. In all places. The Rambam actually has to address. The pasuk seems to indicate this is exclusively in Israel. But the tradition, the analysis based on the Gemara and our oral tradition is that it includes all places. And the meaning of the verse is this should not be done. Be Yisrael to a Jew, whether to themselves, to others. And a person who does do so to themselves or others would be culpable for lashes. This is our Gemara. Even if the person already has damage. So I just want to say, I think in English, the word castration indicates a total devastation to the system. Whereas I think in the halachic and in the Hebrew and our Gemara, there's more nuance. Here, the word misaris, although we translate it as castration, really means damage to the system. And therefore, it would be appropriate to write misaris, achar misaris, like Ketzad. And now he just gives an example. And I know we're a minute over. Shabach v'kar sagid. So if a part of the system is damaged and then someone else cut another part, so that would all be prohibited, even though the system may already not function as it should. One last line. What about if you don't actually do anything to touch or cut the system? Rather, you give a beverage that our Gemara is talking about. It is prohibited, but there are no lashes. The Isha muteres lishleis ikarim kedei l'sarsa ad shaloi teleit. Interesting. A woman may be allowed. What if you sicked an animal or caused another person to be injured in a way that was considered technically serious? Well, what they've done is terrible, and they have other halachic responsibilities to that person, but it's not considered the biblical prohibition of actively being misaris, but the person. Also, this is a hashtag no halach, and this is the last thing we're going to read. Also, you're not allowed to tell a Gentile to ask them to spay, neuter, castrate the animal. But if they did it on their own, it is allowed. And if a Jew played a game, made a shtick, well, then that's a problem. We have to then go and look at the Shulchan Aruch if the Shulchan Aruch says differently. And so there's more to talk on the matter of what to do with animals. Belina, if I remember, I'll try to find an article that gives some practical guidance to what to do for a pet. The main thing is Hashem should bless our Kihila here, our Gemara Chabur, and all of Am Yisrael. And actually, we said it before the recording, but now that it's on the recording, we dedicate today's learning for those who were taken yesterday in Israel in the terrible attack in Bnei Brak, and before that in other places in the Merkaz. And for those that need a refuah shlema, Hashem should send a complete and speedy recovery. And the protector of Israel, Hashem Yisrael. Hashem doesn't sleep and doesn't slumber. And we ask Hashem to protect, and we pray for the well-being of Am Yisrael, land of Israel, and all those who are bravely protecting it. And show me have good news going forward. And Yeshikayach for indulging today's subject.
Oh, thank
You never know what's going to come up tomorrow.
Hope springs eternal.
All right. Shalom Ber Chumash. All right. We're going to end this link and then Chumash will begin.